What's up, everybody? Welcome to Last Man Standing, episode 16. The season is flying by. We're going to talk about every single game on the Week 8 slate. Excited to get into that with you. I'm going to go ahead and introduce my co-host, Ryan Hogue. Ryan, it's been a week since we've talked, buddy. How are you doing personally, my friend?
You know, living the dream back in California. Sorry, I had to miss out last Saturday, but really cool. Finally, the Washington Commanders retiring Darryl Green's jersey, and we had our alumni weekend and supporting Darryl Green, one of the greats of all time, certainly in that franchise, and as well as the NFL. And so I couldn't join you guys Saturday night, but looking forward to chatting it up for this week, number 16. Wow.
Yeah, buddy. And before we bring in our special guest, Ryan, I've got to ask you, because the last time we talked, since then, the entire landscape of the NFL has changed. Amari Cooper was traded to the Bills. DeAndre Hopkins was traded to the Chiefs. Devontae Adams was traded to the Jets. There was even a linebacker trade today. Andy Dalton, Brandon Ayuk, Chris Godwin, Mike Evans all get hurt. So let me ask you real quick, Ryan. I know I'm putting you on the spot. You weren't prepared to answer this question. But of those three big wide receiver trades, since you were a former NFL wide receiver yourself, which do you think will have the biggest impact on the NFL landscape going forward?
I look at DeAndre Hopkins, and I've always believed, obviously he's getting a little older, but I've always believed he was the best in the league when he was at his prime. And he's just been, I mean, if you look at the litany of quarterbacks he's played for, it's a pretty, kind of QB2, QB3 type of list. And for him to be able to go and now play with Patrick Mahomes and have an opportunity to kind of step in and get targets right off the bat, I kind of compare it to Julio Jones when he went over to the Buccaneers. And I remember week 1 against Dallas. This was after Antonio Brown, and I think it was Brady's last year. And Julio Jones was the number 1 receiver. He just ended up tearing his MCL in that first week and kind of never was able to recover from it. But you get a veteran presence that just knows the ins and outs. I finally got to that about 7 years into my career when I was really confident about, adjusting and doing things that I know the quarterback would like. There's no Chiefs receiver that strikes fear in anybody other than Kelsey. And then Xavier Worthy, obviously his speed, but you'll just play behind him. So now you got DeAndre Hopkins able to navigate, and obviously the Chiefs offense is a juggernaut. So that's going to be the biggest splash move. I think Adams, just the Jets aren't really figuring it out. We'll talk a little bit about that, but he at least provides some predictability for Rodgers, because teams are going to play them now a different way, and that's going to open up some things for the other guys. But I think Hopkins is going to be the biggest benefactor.
Good stuff there out of you, Ryan. Let's go ahead and introduce our guest today. I'll hand it over to you to do the introduction, my friend.
Yeah, so we've had a ton of NFL guests, former teammates of mine, which has been a blessing and awesome to hear their perspective, because it's certainly unique. This is somebody that I have remotely been connected to the last number of years. For those out there that don't know, I have a long history of being in reality TV and kind of the limelight. I was on The Bachelorette season 4. I was on The Bachelor Pad season 3. And then most recently, obviously, Tony and I have talked about The Floor, which is a game show, but really anybody knows game shows are reality shows. Well, Steve Carbone is also goes by Reality Steve and has hundreds of thousands of followers because he is the reality TV guru. He knows everything about that, and you should absolutely give him a follow. We'll get all that information of how you can follow him during the show. But most importantly, what I didn't know is that he and I, as well as Tony, like all three of us, there's a lot of synergy in terms of just being flat out sports fans. We talk sports, we're intelligent about sports, and then also this gambling aspect and Circa Survivor in particular. Steve reached out to me a few weeks ago and wanted to kind of have a conversation about how we got kind of this podcast started, how we got involved with Survivor Sweat. Shout out to Survivor Sweat. And so Steve also was one of those that sold his entry early on. And so we're gonna talk to him about that process. And we're just really grateful to have you on the show, Steve. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is great. It's just so random that, Ryan Hogue to me was always a guy that I knew was on the shows. We had never been in contact before. Ryan, you and I actually have a mutual friend. We'll talk about that off air, but it's crazy because I didn't know about Survivor Sweat until about week 2 of the season, when somebody who follows my daily sports podcast came to me and said, "Hey, I know that you've talked about Circa Survivor. Do you know about this where you can, sell off your pick?" And I'm like, "Wait, what? I can make money off this?" So I didn't know. And then I go to Circa Survivor, and then it leads me obviously to your guys' podcast, and I see Ryan Hogue. I'm like, is this the same Ryan Hogue that was on the Deanna season, Bachelor Pad season 3? And I was like, oh yeah, it was. And so I reach out to you, and here we are. But yeah, just crazy, small world.
Steve, it's such a great contest, Circa Survivor. I mean, I'm obsessed with it at this point. I look forward to the entry counts being released on Saturday night. We do our shows on Saturday night as well. We look forward to seeing if there's any no picks. And then, of course, the carnage on Sundays. It makes Sundays so much fun. We're obsessed with Circa Survivor. It sounds like you are too. Can you talk to us a little bit about kind of the genesis of your interest in Circa? Maybe how you first heard about it, how many years you've been doing it, et cetera.
Yeah. Gosh, well, I've been in a local Survivor contest. They call it the Drop Dead Pool, where it started out locally. I don't know, 15 years, 20 years I've been in this pool, and it started out with like 40 people. Now we're up to about 1,500, but it's got a different kind of style to it in that for the first 5 weeks, you can buy back. They basically want the pool to get bigger. It's $20 entry, same deal, one team each week. But you can do as many entries as you want. They give you a discount the more entries you do. But if you lose in week 1, $20 buyback for week 2. Lose in week 2, 30, 40, 50. And then in week 5, you can buy back for 60. And if you have no entries that lost in the first 5 weeks, you can add entries. Well, considering the carnage that happened in the first 5 weeks of the season, this pool is up to $53,000 this year. And
Nice.
We're down to, there were 1,579 entries. We're down to 199, and I've got 2 entries left in that pool. So I've been doing that for years, and then I heard about Circa Survivor, and I'm like, I got to get in. And I did it through just following a lot of the gambling sites that I watch because I gamble every week, and it just came up. I saw it on a Twitter page or something like that. I'm like, what is this? It's like, I got to do it. So I started in 2019, and I've done it every year since. I didn't do it in 2020 because I couldn't get out there to sign up for because of COVID. But yeah, 2019 I started, just had 1 entry that year, but ever since then, multiple entries. This year was the most entries that I had, but that didn't last very long.
Do you have yet like a really tragic bad beat story of how you lost your last entry 1 year or anything like that you can share with us?
I can say that the last 2 years in the pool, I've lost in the same week 10, and I lost by a divisional home favorite that was leading by double digits in the fourth quarter. 2 years ago, I had the Chicago. I was in the final 125 2 years ago. I had the Chicago Bears at home. They were only a 3-point favorite but it was against the Lions. They were up by 10. They were up by 14, and then they threw a pick six, went 3 and out, punted. Detroit marched downfield, scored. And then Detroit kicked a field goal to win 38-35 at the buzzer. Last year, same exact thing. And this one hurts even more, even though I wasn't down to the final 125. But it was week 10, Ravens at home against the Browns, 7-point favorites, up by 10 in the fourth quarter. And it's literally, it hurts bad now because I don't know if you remember this. This was Deshaun Watson's last game. And then we find out after the game, he played the whole second half with a separated shoulder.
Oh.
And yet Ravens 10-point lead in the fourth quarter, blow it against the Browns, and the Browns kick a field goal to win it in overtime. So literally week 10, 2 years in a row, divisional home favorite loses after having double-digit fourth quarter leads.
It's not like there were millions of dollars on the line or anything,
yeah,
Steve.
I know.
I mean,
It's just an absolute nut kick for me. Like that is just, it is awful. And then, look, week 2, Ravens blew another 10-point fourth quarter lead to the Raiders this year, which knocked a lot of people out of the pool, including one of my entries.
Indeed. Steve, do you have an NFL podcast? Did I see that on your Twitter handle where you talk about games each week?
I have a daily sports podcast, but I talk gambling on it a lot. I basically cover it's 20 to 25 minutes long. And I basically Mondays will recap all my picks over the weekend. I'll mostly spend a lot of time September through January talking football, but I'll get into college basketball come February, NBA from February in college basketball till, March, and then NBA and baseball through the summer. But I'll always be bringing up football stories. I'll always throw out gambling stuff. I had a great gambling baseball story last year living in Texas. I just randomly in spring training before last season, I'm not a Ranger fan per se, even though I live in Dallas. I just was like, I want to do a futures bet. And usually when I do futures bet for sports, I try to find somebody with 15 to 25 to 1, maybe 30 to 1. I'm not going for a 6 to 1 favorite because there's no value in that to me. So I'm trying to find a long shot. And I bet last February, and I even tweeted it out during the World Series last year, my ticket of I bet the Rangers to win the AL pennant, and I bet them to win the World Series last year at 48 to 1 in February. And it came through for me. It was total luck. I didn't even follow up this year with a Major League Baseball future bet because I was like, I'm not going to beat that. And now looking at who the participants are in the World Series, I wouldn't have picked either of them just because there's no value there to pick the Dodgers and Yankees, So
people are feeling a little less bad for you now from your Survivor story after hearing that story there. We have a question here, and this could probably be answered by either of you guys. How does an average person get on reality shows? I want to go on Survivor or anything else. Who wants to take that question?
Ryan, you should take it because I think that, you've been on them. I haven't been on them. I have no interest in being on a show, but you take this one.
Yeah. Everybody wants to go on a reality show, to be honest. And I was fortunate that, I had a lot of boxes that, TV like to check off, right? I was a pro athlete. I was in the age and demographic that they're looking for. And I had somebody that wrote me in, and it was to this day, it was like the nicest thing anybody's ever written. And ABC ended up calling me the next day and walked me through the process. So, you're up against stiff competition because, you have a 1 in 30,000 chance probably because everybody wants to go on Survivor or whatever. I would say, a lot of times they're at least open to starting a conversation. And once that happens, you have to differentiate yourself. If you don't have the moniker of professional athlete like I do, right? Or, I was a model internationally, like a lot of those things, right? Just help me automatically get to the front of the line fairly or unfairly. But for, just most people, right, they have to stand out. And there's a reason that people are talking about reality TV the next day. It's because I can't believe Deanna picked Twilly over Ryan or whatever. It's because Twilly was willing to stand in a bush at 2 a.m. and ask how the date was when they got home, right? If you're willing to do that and go above and beyond, they'll keep you around. And I just wasn't willing to drink that Kool-Aid, essentially. Yeah. And that's why I didn't have success on that show, and I'm okay with that. But if you stand out and go, like, if you're off the wall and like super memorable, love the camera, fall in love with the camera, and are willing to like massage your words and have them kind of manipulate those. If you're willing to do that, then you got a real good shot.
I think one thing to add to it is, Ryan, you were on Bachelor and Bachelorette and Bachelorette so many years ago. Now the genre has kind of changed because of the advent of social media. The days of, hey, let me send in an application online and getting picked, your chances are basically slim and none. Nowadays, especially for Bachelor and Bachelorette, it's a lot about who you know. If you are a friend of a former contestant, that is huge because your former contestant friend can say, my friend is single, and they just pass you on. And then you just kind of skip to the front of the line. At least you can get an interview that way. Those open casting calls, I don't think are really a thing anymore where someone's actually getting cast out of that, where they show up at a mall and they film you for 5 minutes. It's more about everything that I've heard nowadays. It's casting departments literally scouring Instagram, looking for people and reaching out to you first and saying, hey, casting producer with the Bachelor, Bachelorette franchise, we saw you do some modeling. Would you be interested? And that's how it works now. And it's just
they
totally
want to
different.
It, make it easy. The cheaper way they can do it, the better, because it's
how did the floor work for you? How did you get cast on the floor?
The floor, I actually, it came across my casting networks, right? So I'm involved with modeling and acting, and I get auditions all the time that kind of through. And I host trivia, so I'm a trivia just fan. Yeah. And I was just like, my dream, Steve, is to be a game show host down the road. Like, I would love to do that. And I was like, well, I love trivia and I love hosting it, so why not go and try this? I didn't really have any expectation. And next thing I know, they were calling me and walking me through this process.
Nice.
Well, Ryan, don't worry. We're not going to be talking about cleaning supplies on this show, so you got nothing to worry about. It'll be in your wheelhouse.
One last question before we get into football, Steve. Yeah. And I don't even know if Tony knows this, but my true love is college basketball. Like that is probably my favorite sport to watch. And the first Survivor pools I ever got into were the NCAA men's 60 or whatever it is, 68 now, field of 68, and Survivor pool with that, where you have to pick 2 teams Thursday, 2 teams Friday, and 2 teams Saturday, 2 teams Sunday, and then 1-1-1-1. Have you ever been a part of those Survivor pools? Because I think those are some of the most fascinating, because you really, if you can pick like 3 of the final 4 teams, you're going to be great, but you know, it's carnage, obviously, and
strategy.
Yeah, I've never done one of those. I've seen them. I've just never done it. I've only done it with NFL. This season, Kelly in Vegas. I'm sure you've heard Kelly in Vegas. You know her on Twitter. She's a friend of mine, and I saw the stuff that she's been posting about college football Survivor pools this year. I joined hers. I'm already out of that because I can't remember who I lost on, but yeah. I think it was Auburn against Cal. Yeah, I lost. I had Auburn at home against Cal, and they basically didn't show up that day. So I'm out of her pool. But that's the only one I've really ever done. I've always just done this NFL pool that I've done locally. Well, not even locally; it's national. There's so many people in it. But and then Circus Survivor. I've never done a March Madness thing. But I go to Vegas for the first week of March Madness. I've done it, I think, 6 years in a row now. And then I always have a guy's trip for first week of NFL season. I'm in Vegas for that. So nice. That's something that I've done ever since college. So I think it's now at 27 of the last 29 years I've gone out to Vegas for first week of NFL season.
Yeah, that's my favorite time to go, Steve. There's nothing better. It's like Christmas morning that first Sunday.
Yeah.
We're going to go ahead and get into Week 8 action. Before we do, though, Steve, that was rude of me. I asked you about your podcast, but go ahead and plug it. What's the name of it so people can check it out if they want to?
Yeah, it's called The Sports Daily. It's on you can get it on Apple. You can get it on Spotify. The Sports Daily, like I said, talk gambling, talk football. Now it's mostly football. I'll do some baseball World Series talk because I'm a Dodger fan, grew up in Southern California. But it's mostly sticking to pro and college football. And then obviously I don't have much to talk about in regards to Circus Survivor anymore because I am in it because I purchased a percentage, but I don't have control of the pick. So I'm following along. I hope the person who's making the picks gets far and wins this thing. But yeah, my season, I had 5 entries this year. It's the most I've ever done. Last year I did 4. The year before I did 3. Then I went 4. And then this year I went 5. And had 3 on Cincinnati week 1. So I was down to 2, went 2 and 3 in week 1. Week 2, I lost on that Ravens game. So I was down to 1 after week 2. And that's when I was told about Survivor Sweat. So I had 1 entry left starting week 3, and I sold 50% and pick control for $4,500. So I was like, okay. So I basically sent 5, and with the fees, about 4,000 I made there. And then I won in week 3. And after week 3, when I had won, that's when a lot of people, I think, lost in week 3. Yeah. So the value went up. And I sold, of the 50% that I had left, I sold 25% for $7,000.
I love it.
So now I had 25. I had made basically after fees $10,300. I had spent $5,000, so I had basically made $5,000, and I had 25% left of my pick, even though I wasn't making it. And then that person lost, or they won in week 4. And then they lost in week 5. And I felt, man, I don't want to be out of this thing. So then I spent $2,000 to purchase 2% of somebody's pick. So
I love it.
That's where I'm at right now. I have 2% of somebody else's pick right now. And so basically take that off the 10. So I've made $8,300 and I spent basically $5,000. And
So
I'm up.
You've
been a buyer and a seller.
Buyer
on the
and a
Survivor
seller this
Sweat
year.
Marketplace.
Yeah.
And how has it been pretty easy to use?
Simple. Yeah. I didn't know how simple. I thought this was going to be so complicated, and it's not. I go on the Survivor Sweat page. I look at the marketplace. It was easy to post my pick, and literally within, I think, 30 minutes to an hour, both times I put up 50% for my pick. Somebody, and then that sold right away. The second one, where I was selling 25%, I initially put it up for 10,000. They countered with 5. I countered back with 7,500, and they said, I'll go for 7,000. I'm like, done. And that's how it went. So we had a couple back and forths, but yeah. So then I was down, like I said, I was down to 25%. I lost that in week 5. And then I was like, I want to be part of Circus Survivor. Even if I'm not making the pick, I want to feel part of it. I feel week 5, that's ridiculous that I'm out of this thing. So I spent $2,000 to take 2% of somebody else's pick, and they're still alive as we speak. So.
All right, Steve, go ahead and look at this board. If you still had control in Circus Survivor right now, 214 people left for $14.266 million. What are your thoughts when you look at this board? Of course, the percentages are based off of implied win probability. Where are you looking at this board?
Well, I can tell you what, just looking at Baltimore versus Cleveland after what happened to me last year, that ended my run. That makes me barf. So I'm not even going to touch that, even though Cleveland is awful. I know they're going with Jameis now, and he's definitely an upgrade. He can't get any worse than what Deshaun Watson has done this year. But I would stay away from that. Divisional games scare me because they play each other twice a year. There's no surprises there. KC Las Vegas, another divisional game. Hell, that took a lot of people out of the pool last year when Vegas beat Kansas City on Christmas Day.
Yeah.
And Kansas City hasn't lost a game since then. So, this is where they finally get their first loss. I honestly, I would go with one of those top 2. I would take Detroit or Denver. I know people might be holding out Detroit for Thanksgiving. I think there's better picks on Thanksgiving than Detroit. So I would go with Detroit, or I would go with Denver at home against who's Denver playing? Was that Carolina?
Carolina.
Yeah. Carolina. Yeah. Yep. I mean, you got to go. Carolina's terrible. They said they're starting Bryce Young because of Andy Dalton's car accident. I don't think either of those teams are losing, but you could have told me in the first 5 weeks of the season, would the top pick of the week lose 4 of those first 5 weeks? I would have told you were crazy, and look what happened. But I think now, because we had the bloodshed we did in those first 5 weeks, I think you're starting to see it even out. You guys know the last 2 weeks, road favorites are 16-1 against the spread. Like, it is really evening out. Vegas has gotten killed the last 2 weeks by the public. So it feels like it's starting to even out, and the lines are starting to get higher and higher now, where the first 6 weeks of the season, the average line was like 4.5, which is the lowest it's ever been through 6 weeks. So yeah. But I would probably go with one of those. Detroit isn't losing to Tennessee. I don't care who Tennessee plays at quarterback. Detroit's obviously, I think, the best team in the NFC right now. And Baltimore's the best team in the AFC. I don't like touching divisional games after what happened to me with Bears Detroit 2 years ago and Baltimore Cleveland last year. I get scared of those. So I'll go Detroit, Tennessee, or Denver, Carolina. I think those are safe bets for anybody out there.
I'm gonna go a little rogue here and say, although I totally agree, normally I'm not a big fan of, especially this late, going within a division, especially on the road. I think for me, this is the Jets playoff game. And similar to where Cincinnati was a few weeks ago with their backs against the wall after they had lost to Washington, coming to that game, they had to win it. I think the Jets, I would bet all my dollars, my 401k, put it on the Jets. If I had a Circus Survivor pick right now, that's where I would be going. And how about you, Tony? I know we're doing it a little out of order, but we might as well just start with that, and then we'll let Steve go on his way. But who's your one trick pony here today?
I actually love the Jets too, Ryan. The only problem is only 9% of people in Circus Survivor have them left. So if you're one of those 9%, I think that they're a great option this week. Like you said, their back is against the wall, must-win game against the team that they already wrecked earlier this season. So you got to be feeling really good about that Jets pick. Hassan Reddick is going to be playing this week, so I like that one a lot. The OG Fat Panda, correct me if you're wrong. If I'm wrong, you are still in Circus Survivor. I believe you survived last week, brother. So please confirm that, because I think that's the truth. And congratulations if that is the case. I believe he got by last week. Zocold says, I like the Dolphins.
Ooh.
If Tua comes back, and it sounds like Tua is indeed going to be back against the Cardinals, that's sneaky. Survivor Steve, that's a way to kind of be on an island, right? Strategy-wise. You can zig while other people zag. What do you think about that one?
I like it in the fact, and I didn't even know this until I was watching Monday Night Countdown, excuse me, on Monday night. Did you see the stat that Kyler Murray hasn't won back-to-back games since 2021? Hasn't won back-to-back games. Not talking about
that's
point
insane.
Spread, covering 2 games in a row. He has not won back-to-back games since early 2021. And they won Monday night, and they're coming off a short week. He also hasn't played. He's much better at home than he is on the road as well. But there is that Kyler Murray that sometimes he plays, he won in San Francisco this year, and he had one of those Kyler games where you're just like, my gosh, why is this guy more consistent? That's the problem that you get with Kyler. He's consistently inconsistent. He just can't put a string of games together, as shown by the fact he hasn't won 2 in a row in 4 years. So I like that play, especially if Tua plays. If it's not Tua, I don't want any part of Dolphins. They are absolutely god-awful this year when Tua doesn't play. But I heard a quote from Tyreek today where he said, anybody that has me in fantasy, start me. The gang's back together. We're rolling. Tua's back, so I guess they had a good practice. It looks like Tua's playing. Wouldn't be a bad zag. I wouldn't be against it for a zag based on Tua being back and the fact that Kyler hasn't won 2 games in a row in 4 years.
Must win for them, right? I mean, they're
yeah.
I mean, Buffalo, I think Buffalo will eventually come down a little bit. I don't think they're going to be, more than a 10-win team. So if Miami has the pieces, I really do believe from a talent standpoint, I think, they win this game. They're at 3-4. Arizona on a short week, like you said, Steve, has to travel all the way across the country. That's a lot of time zones. I don't know. It's ballsy, but I like it. I mean, but also if Tua gets sacked in the first quarter,
then you're just crossing your fingers because they don't have a quarterback that can put points on the board.
Right.
Yeah. And I really do think that, again, looking at that schedule, I just don't think, just like the last 2 weeks, I don't think this is going to be a week where we have that, New England over Bengal upset, the Raider over Baltimore upset, the Washington over Bengal upset in week 3. I just don't see it again. I really do think this is going to be another week where not many people get eliminated in the pool. So that's why I would go with one of the top ones. I don't think it's worth it to zag this week because I really don't see Tennessee winning in Detroit or New Orleans winning in Denver. I think those are your best bets.
Fellas, you gave us some great nuggets on the Cardinals-Dolphins game, but there's an angle that I think trumps all of the things that you guys mentioned. Call of Duty comes out this week. Kyler Murray does not do well when new Call of Duty games come out. There's all sorts of rumors about him being addicted to that game. So just keep that in the back of your mind if you want to put one of your survivor entries on the Dolphins.
And
Tony's the ultimate sleuth when it comes to so just proceed with caution, listeners. That's all I got to say.
And not playing Call of Duty and basically apparently just not a guy who is, I mean, we've heard the rumors for years, not first one in and not last one out of the, practice facility, Dude's
going to be up till 4 a.m. eating Cheetos, playing Call of Duty, showing up at practice with orange hands the next morning. We'll see how it goes. Someone said, not many, they're quoting you, Steve, not many people getting eliminated this week. I've heard that one before. Hey, that sure has been true so far this season.
And all 3 of us have been eliminated. So
I know. Coming from a guy who had 5 entries and all of them were gone by week 5. Yeah. No, I hear what you're saying. I get it.
So true.
But if you said this the last 2 weeks, if I would have been on and said this in week 6 and week 5 and week 6, I would have been right because nobody's been eliminated the last 2 weeks.
Yep.
It's those first 5 that was just, I had never seen anything like that before where the top pick of the week, I've seen like the second best pick, the third best pick losing multiple weeks in a row. I had never seen, since I've been doing this, the top pick of the week, 4 of the first 5 weeks gone. It never happened before, but this year it did. And that was an anomaly. Let's face it. Like People get eliminated in Circus Survivor for sure. But to have 14,266 people down to 200 people in 7 weeks, and basically in 5 weeks because nobody's really lost the last 2 weeks, that was unheard of. It's never been that quick. I think they even put out the stat. I think Circa put out the stat. This is the quickest we've lost this many people. It was an anomaly how many people lost in those first 5 weeks. It's crazy. I'm going to keep it in mind for next year for sure. I'm telling you right now, I said it on my podcast today. I don't care who the biggest favorite is in week 1 next week. I'm not picking them in my Survivor, even with multiple picks. I'm going to just stay away. And, I was kind of looking at it like, well, why? What causes this? And I thought about it. I'm like, look, these teams haven't played a game since January. They basically don't play their starters in preseason. Everybody playing that week 1 game, no matter how good you think their roster is, the bottom line is they haven't played in an NFL game, and we know how much, pads aren't really considered anymore during practice. It's like, okay, no wonder why New England beat the Bengals in week 1. The Bengals didn't look like they were ready or had prepared. So it's almost like you can't throw it out. But now that we're 7 weeks in and we've seen these teams play for 7 weeks, that's why I feel like I can say I don't see Detroit losing to a team like Tennessee, But in week 1, everything's off the table because nobody's played a game in 7 months. And there's just so many restrictions now on training camp and how many days of pads you can go. I just think week 1 and early season NFL season is why we're seeing these upsets.
And that's why I try to implore Tony, who wants to start his journey in May once the schedule comes out. And he's like, I have it all mapped out how I'm going to win the $14 million. I'm like, dude, how about we wait until after week 2 and then we can talk? And it's also something I talked in the radio when I did the Raiders pregame show this past week with the co-hosts of exactly what you're saying, Steve, in terms of just the difference between when I played, right, versus now, and the limitations on hitting and the you need football. You need, your body needs to be calloused, right? You need those reps. And when you're starting week 1, it's like the first game of preseason. That's just hard to watch. And it levels the playing field for a really talented roster like Cincinnati and a team that doesn't have as much talent like the Raiders or like New England evens playing field. So,
because if you watched, I was in Vegas, I had all the games, obviously all the games were on, watching at the Venetian Yahoo Sportsbook. New England deserved to win that game. That wasn't luck. They dominated the Bengals. The Bengals just didn't look prepared. They looked out of sync offensively. Hell, the 3 wins they have this year are all against bad teams. I don't even know how good the Bengals are right now. I'm still scratching my head about them, why they aren't better. They beat the Giants on Sunday Night Football by 10, only because they broke through the line on a 30-yard run with, under 2 minutes to go, or that's a 3-point game. Yeah. They haven't impressed me at all, and I'm surprised. I thought they would be better as everybody did week 1, because how many had them in week 1? Was it like 5,000? 55, 5,900?
It was right around there. That sounds about right. Yeah.
Maybe it was 3,700. I don't know. I thought it was only. But
I thought it was more. I thought it was so close to 5, but
it was several thousand.
30%.
Because they were the biggest. They were the biggest favorite on the board. Let's face it. Nobody, until you get maybe later on in the season, especially early on in the season, I think most people that play Circus Survivor are just looking who's the biggest favorite on the board. I'll just take them, and they were 9-point favorites. I don't think anybody else on week 1 was over a 6-point favorite. They were that much farther out ahead of everybody. That's why they were taken. And I lost 3 on them in week 1. It wasn't fun to watch. And I'm sitting there going, they deserve to lose this game. Trust me, I've gotten beaten so many bad beats in my life, gambling for 20 years, but that one wasn't a bad beat. They got absolutely trucked in that game by New England. And yet you look back on it now and you're like, how did New England win that game? And New England's looked absolutely terrible since that game. It's like, and the Raiders have looked terrible ever since they came back from a double-digit fourth quarter deficit against Baltimore, who has looked like world beaters ever since then. They've 5-0 since that game. It's just, you can't explain some of these things, really. There's a lot of luck involved. We know this.
Indeed. And OG Fat Panda says, I'm on map number 235 at this point. Ryan likes to give me shit for planning so far ahead. And what he said is accurate. I do start right when the schedule comes out in May or June or whenever it is. But I do have to correct you on one thing, Ryan. I don't this is the path. I have multiple paths. They're flexible, etc. I'm, of course, willing to move off of them if they're injuries. And I know you think that's a waste of time, but I don't like the idea of just going into the season practically blind and just picking the best team week 1, week 2. I've got to be always thinking ahead.
How many did you have to start?
I had 10 entries.
And you're done with all of them?
Yep. I sold on Survivor Sweat as well.
Okay, so you've made some money back, if not.
Yeah, I'm in a good spot for that for sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
That's tough. Who was the guy last year? Was it last year or the year before that had like 7 entries and he was putting them all on one team every week, and then he ended up losing because he had it all on one? He was on the radio shows because they were bringing him on. Like, why are you putting all 7 on one? It's you don't have 7 entries. You have 1. If you're putting all of them on one entry, you don't have 7. You have 1.
Well, we've got something like that this year. I know what you're talking about. I don't remember the guy's name from last year, but I do remember that happening. And this year, there's one guy at the top with 6 left. And he had them all on. Do you remember, Ryan, who he went all in on?
I think I saw that too. Yeah.
I can't remember.
Yeah, I can't remember either. But I mean,
maybe there's some weeks to do that, but you can't do it every week. You can't do it every week because one loss and you're done. You're kicking yourself because like, why not spread it out? At least if I lose the main one, like in week 1 when I had 5, I had three Bengals, which lost, and then I had, I think, 1 Seattle and 1 Rams. Yeah, that was my week 1. So you got to spread. You can't put them all on the same team every week just for that sole reason of what if, you know?
Well, it's the what if, and you need to guard against bad luck. Like I lost my Survivor entry last year with under 120 people left when my quarterback got hurt in the 4th quarter. The game went to overtime, and I lost that game. Like, even if you have conviction that's out of this world, crazy shit can happen in terms of injuries or illnesses. How about Deebo Samuel getting pneumonia out of nowhere last week for the 49ers? I mean, crazy stuff happens. So yeah, you got to guard against that. And I think spreading them out is a good way to do that. But the downside, as we all know, to spreading them out is you're more likely to step on a landmine. And so there's kind of some pros and cons with that. It's a philosophical thing. Yeah. We've got comments are just rolling in, you guys. Rams are in trouble. Bob, I'm not sure if you mean this week or just in general, but I think, that could apply to both.
They're Thursday night, right? They're Thursday night against Vikings. Yeah.
All right. So someone gave us the scoop. That guy who's got all 6 entries, he went all in on the Bears and then all in on Philly and then all in on the Rams. So I mean, he's been doing it.
It's worked for him so far. I'm just saying, if he keeps doing it, he's not getting to the end of the season with 6 entries. I'm telling you that right now. Doing that. There's no way. It's never happened in the history of Circa. Has anybody had 2 and like when the contest has ended? Has there ever been anybody that had more than 1 entry left?
Yes.
There has been.
Yeah, it was early on though, when the prize pool, you guys, was like maybe around $1 million or so. You know what I mean? And so I think he ended up taking home like 250,000 or something like that from 2 entries. So it was a much smaller pool. Love My Baxter is actually his entry name. I'm connected with him on Twitter, so that's why I'm aware of that. But Steve, we're going to go ahead and let you go. If you can just let us know where people can follow you, and go ahead and drop the name of your podcast and anything else that you want to plug too before you head out.
Yeah, no, just you want to hear some 20 to 25 minutes where I kind of update you on the previous day's sports or whatever. It's called the Sports Daily with Reality Steve. You can get it on Apple Podcasts. You can get it on Spotify, and a lot of gambling talk on there. I give my picks every Friday. I'm doing well in college. I think I'm 5 or 7 games over in 500 in college. Not doing well in pro this year because the last 2 weeks have killed me because I have been on a lot of home dogs, and home dogs are 1-16 against the spread the last few weeks. So, I've been betting against those road favorites, and they've been destroying the last few weeks. So, but I am 5-2. I do give a best bet in college, best bet in pro, other plays, and then I do a totals play in college and pro. And then I do money line plays, but those don't count against my record. 5-2 in my best bets in pros, and I believe I'm 4-3 in my best bets in college. So I've done well there, but it's been a decent year. But just sports talk, give my thoughts, give my takes on what's going on, the hottest topics going on, World Series talk as well. But yeah, Sports Daily. I'm at Reality Steve on Twitter, at Reality Steve on Instagram, and at Reality Steve on Threads, if anybody even uses that anymore. So
sweet
as well.
Sounds good, brother. This was awesome, man. So glad to have you here, Ryan. Thanks for connecting us, man.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. I'll talk to you soon, Ryan.
Yep, sounds good.
All right, good stuff, Ryan. Great connection there. That was some good intel, some good insight. Let's go ahead and run the board, brother. Let's start with that Thursday night game, Vikings at Rams. I think the NFL's given us a decent Thursday night game here. Could be better, could be worse. Cooper Kupp is going to be back for the Rams. Puka Nacua is practicing, but I think he's very much less likely to play in this one. Who do you like in this one here? Vikings, Rams.
Yeah, Rams always, I obviously followed the Minnesota since that was my team growing up, and I played with them for 3 years. But Rams always play Minnesota tough, and Stafford in particular always plays Minnesota tough going back to his Detroit days. This certainly isn't a rollover game for Minnesota by any means. I know they just lost a close one, and they're going to be hungry. But I want to say my thought process for this is if the Rams lose, they're in sell mode. But I think that they're still holding on to hope that they have a shot at, backdoor wild card. And so it's going to be a competitive game, a Thursday night game, always dangerous. And I'm staying away from it. Rams are 3-point underdogs, but they don't really have home underdogs, but they don't have much of a home field advantage. I think it goes into the fourth quarter, and that's why, from a survivor standpoint, I'm staying away.
Gotcha. Yeah, and Vikings have the Jaguars and Titans back-to-back weeks 10 and 11, so those are good times to save the Vikings here. I'd be surprised if anybody took the Vikings with the remaining 214 entries. Maybe one or two people trying to get cute on Thursday, but that is definitely a stay away for survivor purposes for me. Moving on here, Jets-Patriots. You brought up this game earlier. You love the Jets. Why do you like the Jets so much in this matchup?
Pushing it all in on the Jets. I watched, first of all, New England's coming off of a London game, right? And are they the first team, Tony, of the year that hasn't gotten a bye post-London?
Of this season? I know Bill Belichick loved to do that in years past for some reason with the Patriots, like when they would travel abroad. But so far this year, they might be. I'd have to check the schedule for that.
I feel like every team has gotten a bye until them, and Jacksonville, ironically, will be playing this week as well. That's something to factor in because that football players are so regimented, so disciplined. Teams are so concrete sequential in how they line everything up from practices to treatment and all that. And when it gets thrown into disarray because of international game, like that certainly factors in. And you got a Jets team that, it's got two major pieces just added with Hassan Reddick and Devontae Adams. You got an offense that is a really explosive offense if they can ever block anybody up front. And they're playing for their playoff lives, really. I truly believe if they lose, they go to 2-6, tied with New England last in that division. I just believe they have to win this game. I believe they will win this game, and it won't be close.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I don't really have much else to add with that. I like that they might be getting Hassan Reddick back as a pass rusher there. Their running game is starting to come to life a little bit. The first couple of weeks, I'm like, where's Breece Hall? Like, what is he doing? And so you're starting to see positive signs out of the Jets. I still think the Jets make the playoffs. I really do. Their schedule moving forward is pretty soft. I think they win this game against the Patriots pretty easily. Point spread opened up at 6.5. It's up over 7 at this point. Early money's coming in on the Jets. I like them in this one. Moving on. Ravens, Browns. Survivor Steve said this game scares him. I'll lead off here by saying this game scares me too. I think we're going to see a very different looking Browns team. You got Jameis Winston at quarterback. Nick Chubb was back last week, and I know that he didn't look good at all. He looked a bit rusty, but that's to be expected when you've been out that long. Don't be surprised if he has a big game in this one. Obviously, I'm not going to be surprised if the Ravens win this one. But with so many other good options this week, I want zip, zilch, nothing to do with the Ravens. But I will throw this out there. If you don't use the Ravens here, where else are you going to use them? At the Giants, week 15, against Cleveland in Baltimore, week 18. You planning that far ahead? So it's kind of like maybe you do use them this week just because there's not a ton of great opportunities later. Would you take them against the Browns or the Giants? Which one's a better matchup, you think, for the Ravens?
Wow, that's a great question. I think is the Giants one on the road or at home?
Yep, at New York.
At New
week
York.
15.
Yeah. I'm thinking week 15, you could have weather come into play, which is a little scary for me. So I'm thinking Cleveland is more of a pick on my end. I mean, they just traded Monty Cooper, obviously. They just switched their quarterback. They're down to their third quarterback, whether or not you believe Winston's number 3. That doesn't matter. They just switched their coordinator. their offensive play caller, to my former quarterback from the NFL Combine, Ken Dorsey. He and I came out the same year. And
Nice.
Fun Ken Dorsey story. He and I this is right before the weigh-in, and he and I were in the green room pounding water bottles. I mean, I have never drank so much water in my entire life. Looking back, it was the dumbest thing because then we have to go and perform after, and I'm all waterlogged and things like that. But I probably drank 2 gallons of water just because I was so transfixed on wanting to weigh 200 pounds. And, when you're over 6'2" and you're under 200 pounds, they're like, you might be too frail. But I weighed in right at 200 pounds. I was so proud of myself. And I basically barfed afterwards, but Ken Dorsey too was just, because he was super light as well. Baltimore on a short week, they had an explosive win. Marlon Humphrey got banged up. I'm keeping an eye on that, but I'm just not a believer in Jameis Winston. I think he's a mouthpiece, and whether or not his teammates love him, that I don't know. I know some have come out, like Gerald McCoy was just like, when he was eating the W, like he was just like, everybody was like, what is this clown doing? Like, yeah. I don't know if that translates to how he's perceived on the team now, but I know that he, for better or for worse, wasn't beating out Deshaun Watson. And Deshaun Watson is by far the worst quarterback, at least from a playing standpoint this year. So I think Baltimore wins, and I would be fine. I like the Jets more just because I think they're hungrier, and it's not a division, or it is division, but I just think Cleveland plays Baltimore a little tougher. But again, I like Baltimore.
Gotcha. All right, moving on here. Packers at Jaguars, another team that was just in London. So pretty much everything that you shared, your concerns about the Patriots, I would think would hold true for the Jaguars here as well. Would you take the Packers and fade the Jags in this spot?
Jaguars, I still can't get a pulse for if they're a reasonable team or just terrible. And I tend to believe that they're actually kind of decent if they get healthy. Now, coming off 2 weeks in London, like they say, however many hour difference it is that's how many days it takes for you to get your body back equilibrium, right? I think it's a 6-hour difference from East Coast time to Greenwich Mean Time. So that means 6 days after they played, like that means their body clock, they're probably waking up at 3 a.m. half the time. Like there's a lot, again, 2 weeks there. That's a long time. But this is a game I'm staying away from just simply because I really believe they have a lot of talent now with Evan Ingram back. They kind of have a two-headed monster with their running back as far as long as Travis Etienne plays. Tank Bigsby, I think, has been really, really good. And then they got, Brian Thomas, Christian Kirk. They have weapons. So again, Green Bay's defense is nasty and it's getting even better. But I'm staying away from this game. If I had to choose, I think Green Bay wins by a field goal, but I don't know.
Yeah, this is one for me. I would stay away from this and Circa Survivor as well. I get the appeal on the Jaguars. What you said about them, you said something to the effect of you're not sure if they're an okay team or if they're a bad team. And could it be true that they're both and they're just inconsistent and they're capable on any Sunday of coming out and surprising you, but they're also capable of putting up a dud. And I think that makes it a little scary from a Survivor perspective because it's a bit of a Jekyll and Hyde act. And you don't want to assume that they're going to get the bad Jaguars and all of a sudden the good Jaguars come in. The interesting angle in this one for me is that Doug Peterson's job may be on the line in this game. I was actually surprised he wasn't fired already immediately after London. So it's like, I wish I knew someone in that locker room so that I could be like, do they like him? Because if they like him, they could be playing some inspired ball to try to help him keep his job. But if they don't like him, you might see that effort go down a little tiny bit in this one.
Tony,
and a little less inspired.
You always say that. From a player's perspective, Tony, not one time in my career did I think I need to play a certain way so my coach doesn't get fired. Ever. Never talked about. Even if we're 0-15, right? And although I didn't play on an 0-15 team, but I played on a team that got Fossil was fired during the season. But at no point during that season was there any chatter in the locker room. So he just needed to quit those conspiracy theories, like the loneliness. No, it doesn't happen.
Well, do you agree that they may play more inspired to try to help them keep their coach's job? You don't buy that either?
No, 0%. They care about feeding their family.
So weren't you saying that those guys? Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm getting you confused with someone else. Weren't you saying those guys were playing for Antonio Pierce last year for the Raiders because he was interim and they wanted him to keep his job, and so those guys were playing a little more inspired, playing harder for him because they want him to be the coach the following year?
I will say Antonio Pierce is like a player's coach that you like root for and genuinely like believe in because he believes in you. Like there's a difference between, because there's that mutual respect there, you certainly, that might provide a little uptick in your like, hey, I don't want to disappoint my coach because I know he believes in me. That's different than being like, if we lose, coach is going to be fired. I need to step it up. Like this is professional football, right? This isn't college. Like we're playing for one reason, right? Is to make sure we're getting our job done. Period. The rest of that is noise.
Gotcha. Got some passion there from Ryan. Appreciate that. Moving on here. Cardinals Dolphins. We talked about this game really briefly already earlier in the show. Tua, it's looking like he's going to be back. I could go on a whole tangent about why I'm scared to death for that guy, and I'm nervous for him just from a human perspective here. Cardinals, I wasn't really impressed with them in that game against the Chargers, honestly. I think the Chargers could have very easily won that game, maybe should have won that game. Really controversial call in the fourth quarter of that game. I get the appeal here to take the Dolphins against the Cardinals. It's sneaky. Not a lot of people are going to be on it. If I had one entry left in Circus Survivor, no way in hell I'm doing it. If I had 5 or 6 entries, maybe I'd consider it. What are your thoughts on this one, Cards Dolphins?
Well, last time Tua played, he didn't look very good against the Bills before he got knocked out of the game. I mean, he just threw 3 or 4 interceptions, and it's not like they were tip passes. They were just bad throws. The team looked bad. It was on a Thursday night. I will say this. I don't understand until you walk in a person's shoes. Like we should never, we should be slow to speak, quick to listen. Right. I don't understand why he of all players doesn't wear a Guardian cap. That just, to me, is just mind-boggling. It's just idiotic. However, I will say, the statement he made in terms of from a player's perspective, safety is the safety, and I'm just there are risks involved. I would have, Tony, when I say this, I would have died on that field. You would have had to, in order, if I wouldn't have got cut, that's the way I would have gone out of the game. That's my mentality. I would die on the field, and I would be fine dying on the field. Football players, a lot of us, have the mentality that we've accepted that fate if that is the unfortunate cause of playing a child's game for a king's ransom. Full stop. If I die on that field, fine. I died doing something I love, something I was passionate about, and something I stepped onto that field knowing very well, that this could be my last day. And I'm okay with that. And I would keep coming back, injury after injury after injury. None of that stuff means anything, because the only thing I focused on when I was playing was, how can I be a better football player? I want to continue to grow. I want to continue to get better. And none of that stuff scared me. None of it. Now, I didn't have those reactions to concussions and things like that. Maybe I have a different conversation, but I can tell you right now that I doubt it. I think I'm saying the same exact thing. I probably would have said it a little differently because I don't like the way he came across, but full stop. I would have absolutely died on that field and been fine with it.
Hey, the way that you're describing that, and you're being okay if you die in the football field because you're dying doing what you love, I think that's how Kyler Murray feels about Call of Duty. The guy's passionate about that game. If he goes out playing Call of Duty.
I express my heartfelt, and then you go with Call of Duty. Typical. What a jerk move. Let's move on. Next one.
Next game up, we've got Eagles at Bengals. I actually like the Bengals -2.5 here in this game. I think they can give the Eagles a lot of trouble, but from a Circus Survivor perspective, in a week like this, when there's a lot of options, I want nothing to do with the Bengals here in this spot. Not to mention, the Bengals have ruined a lot of people's Circus Survivor season so far. You got any interest in either of these teams here, Ryan?
I have. You could put a gun to my head and ask who's going to win or you're going to die. I have no idea. The team that scores first, I really think, will have a good chance of winning simply because I feel like the other team gets a little more one-dimensional. Philly runs the ball well. Cincinnati doesn't defend the run super well, but they also lost one of their starting corners. Cincinnati throws the ball well. Philly, so I don't. 6 and 1/2 dozen the other. Stay away.
Yeah, that's where I'm with you on that one. Next one. This is the game that you won with week 1 when you took the Texans over the Colts. You feel any differently about these two teams? Or can I assume that because you liked it week 1, you would also take the Texans if you had them available in this spot?
Is Anthony Richardson still the quarterback of the Colts?
He sure is.
Give me the Texans.
You like the Texans there. Okay. Colts injuries. It looks like DeForest Buckner and Jonathan Taylor might be coming back for them. That's probably their best offensive and defensive player. They were limited in practice today. Downs, their wide receiver, their starting center, and their starting tackle were all out of practice today. So some good news at practice for the Colts, some bad news at practice for the Colts. Let me say this about them real quick. They've won 4 out of their last 5 games. Quietly.
Yeah,
I was surprised when I saw that.
3 of those, Flacco.
True. Yeah. Very good point. Very good point. All 7 of their games, though, Ryan, win or lose, have been decided by 6 points or less. So they've been in every game this year.
I do think Nico Collins is maybe the best receiver in the NFL right now.
Whoa.
And him missing, the Texans look like a different team without him. Tank Dell had a 0 last week, and Stephon Diggs was 2 for 2 yards or something just ridiculous. Jair Alexander obviously is a shutdown corner, but they got to shore up some things off offensive line wise, and they got to be able to run the ball. And they ran the ball really well against the Colts week 1. I think they will be able to again at home. I mean, the Colts only kept it somewhat close is because 3 fluke explosive plays. I just don't see that happening this week. I like the Texans.
Yeah, I like the Texans to win the game. And just from a survivor perspective, you're trusting yourself going against a team that's won 4 out of 5 games, fluky or not, with or without Flacco. That alone is a little bit scary. And I just think there's, like I keep saying, I think there's some better options this week, including the next one up, Lions at Titans. I think the entry count when we do our Saturday show, Ryan, I think this is going to be fascinating for this game because it's clearly the most obvious pick on the board if you just want to survive, but they're also a really good option. I disagree with Survivor Steve a little bit. I think they could arguably be the best option on Thanksgiving. I don't trust Dallas against the Giants at all. So this is really a point in the season where you need to start thinking about Thanksgiving because what you do this week has huge implications on that massive Thanksgiving week moving forward. So if you're still alive in Survivor, Ryan, let's pretend you've got all your Thanksgiving teams left at this point. Do you risk burning the Lions now and not having them on Thanksgiving, or do you go with one of these other options, some of the other teams that you mentioned that you like, and save the Lions for later? And by the way, that's a typo. That's not Lions at Broncos there. That's a typo on my part.
Yeah. I do not like. I'm staying away from Chicago, Detroit if I can on Thanksgiving. I prefer betting on Dallas at home against the Giants or Green Bay at home against the Dolphins. Chicago. I think that's a true coin flip. You keep calling him Survivor Steve, although he is Survivor Steve. Reality Steve.
Reality Steve. Thank you.
Yep. He. Tennessee, Detroit. I mean, Tennessee. It looks like. Right. I mean, they traded Harold. What's his last name? Harold Landry? No. Whoever they're.
Oh, the linebacker?
Their linebacker. Yeah.
Yeah. They traded him to Seattle today. His name's escaping me right now, too. But it looks like they're sellers for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. They look like they've recognized that, okay, they can't figure out ways to get Calvin Ridley the ball with DeAndre Hopkins on the other side. Now he's shut down. The only thing I like about their team is Snead, and they're hanging on to him because, again, when you have a shutdown corner, that's really good. So he can shut down Amon St. Brown without Jameson Williams. I think that definitely plays into the fact that they're not going to be able to pass the ball as well. And so, I'm going to put a bunch of guys in the box. Say Snead, shut down Amon St. Brown, and hope you can keep it close. But again, Mason Crosby, does he strike fear in anybody? Is that who's starting? Who knows?
Yeah.
Detroit probably wins, but I wouldn't be shocked if it's sneaky close because again, these are professionals, and even when a team looks like they're giving up, like no, that's my opportunity, the Ryan Hogues of the world, to come in and be like, this is my opportunity. Like, I scored a touchdown playing for the Redskins back in the day and against Jacksonville, and guess what? Jacksonville signed me in the offseason because of it. Like, this is your chance.
Yeah, and to your point on Snead, he's certainly capable of going in there and giving St. Brown some trouble, but he hasn't played well this year. Like, he's getting a lot of heat in Tennessee. A lot of fans are like, hey, we paid you a lot of money. His Pro Football Focus coverage grade, I think, is under 40 right now. He's having a really, really bad season. And I wonder, you got to start questioning at this point. I mean, we're going into week 8, and I think he's only missed one game because of injury. The rest he's looked bad. I don't think this is the case, Ryan, but cornerbacks fall off quickly, like Nnamdi Asomugha, Josh Norman, really quickly, like after they turn 30. I don't think this is the case with Snead, but it at least should be discussed because he's terrible.
The only game I've watched Tennessee, because they're painful to watch, I watched a little bit of the Chicago game, shut down DJ
Bad
Moore.
weather, though. Was there bad weather in that game?
No, it's perfect weather.
Okay.
And then I watched him against the Jets, and he completely shut down Garrett Wilson. So, some of that Pro Football Focus stuff, I don't buy it.
He's getting a lot of heat in Tennessee. The fans are not in love with him so far. And he's probably 50-50 to play in this one, so it'll be interesting to see. Moving on here. Falcons, Bucks. We had an instant classic the last time these two teams faced each other. Kirk Cousins threw for 500 yards. There's that overtime game. They got that touchdown in overtime. No Mike Evans, no Chris Godwin. Are those injuries enough to make you trust the Falcons here in Circa Survivor, Ryan?
Yeah, I think the Falcons win. I don't think it puts me over the edge especially given the slate of games. I'm not betting that, but if I was, and I might, since I'm going to be in Vegas this weekend, I would probably bet something on Atlanta. Atlanta came off their worst game. I kind of had a feeling, and I think I mentioned it last week in that show that they were going to have kind of a blip against Seattle, who was desperate. But you don't just lose your number one receiver. You lose your number 1 and 2. I just don't know. It's kind of what the Raiders are facing right now, with the exception of like the tight end position. They just have no man beaters, right? And yeah, the Falcons don't put a lot of pressure on you, but now they're in a position where they can bring an extra rusher, play man-to-man, and just say, which of your guys is going to beat us man-to-man? Jalen McMillan? I don't think so. Cade Otton? That guy, right? I probably could beat him in a 40 right now. Like, I just they don't have a lot of guys with a lot of wiggle. Maybe Bucky Irving does something in the, on the screen game but whereas the Falcons, they still got all their guys, and, the Bucks, they looked real vulnerable last week, giving up a lot of touchdowns to Baltimore. Jamel Dean's down. I mean, yeah, I like the Falcons by double digits.
Yeah, I like the Falcons here too. If you like that line of thinking from Ryan that they could win by double digits, you've got to at least consider it in Survivor, honestly, because this is an opportunity to be on an island. There's going to be big chunks of people on Baltimore. There's going to be double-digit chunks of people on the Jet. Well, not the Jets, because there's only 9% available, but on some of these other teams that we've talked about, Lions, Baltimore, games that we haven't talked about yet. There'll be a big chunk on the Broncos against the Panthers for sure. So if you're Selection Saturday, you're listening to those guys over at Circa say, hey, there's only 4 people who have picked the Falcons. You're going to be feeling really good going into Sunday. And that is an opportunity to do that with a team that's facing a banged up Bucs team. Divisional matchup, sure, little concerning, little scary, but it's a way to get cute and potentially get your leg up in this competition. Saints, Chargers, 71% of people have the Chargers available to them, Ryan. Bosa, DJ Shark, both limited in practice today. I'd say that's a good sign that they're limited this early in this week. A little too early to tell. Saints, though, get back Ruiz, Patrick, Werner, McGovern, Olave, Taysom Hill were all limited in practice today. And all those guys didn't play last week. So this is a situation where the Saints are getting healthy. They still don't have their quarterback back at this point. That's the most important injury. But would you trust Jim Harbaugh and the Chargers at home against the Saints this week?
Yeah, 5 straight losses for the Saints. And, we live in a quarterback league. Harbaugh rarely lose back-to-back games, especially one they probably feel slip through their fingers. Saints are coming off of a mini bye though, so you have to factor that in. But as long as Rattler is the quarterback, and I think he's actually done a solid job, like he hasn't looked terrible. Chargers defense is just too good at all three levels. I think they win it, but it's going to be a rock fight, 16-13, something like that.
Yeah, the Chargers finished the season with arguably two of the worst teams in the NFL, Patriots and Raiders, week 17, week 18. So that's something just to keep in the back of your mind here. I know that hurt, Ryan. You do the pregame shows for the Raiders. You don't like me saying they're one of the worst teams in the NFL, but they're playing like it right now, brother. Next up, we've got Bills, Seahawks. We mentioned that the Seahawks trade Ernest Jones was the name of that linebacker, by the way, who the Seahawks acquired from the Titans. Seahawks sent Jerome Baker over to the Titans. So it was an upgrade at linebacker for the Seahawks. Playing against the Bills at home in Seattle. Tough place to play. Seattle's coming off a very impressive win that you just mentioned against the Falcons. Keep in mind that Seattle does have some Christmas value moving forward. Would you consider the Bills or Seahawks in this one? I want nothing to do with either team.
Stay away. It'll be a fun game to watch. I think this will be a game that you will be able to find out if Seattle is for real, and Buffalo for that matter. I think both teams I think the winner of this makes the playoffs. I think the loser maybe misses out. How about that? It's a long fight for Buffalo to go all the way across. I'm surprised that they're getting 3 points. Seattle doesn't lose at home very often. So, but yeah, not a survivor pick. Stay away.
All right, next up, Bears, Commanders. Obviously, the big news in this one is Jaden Daniels' ribs. Didn't practice today. Marcus Mariota looked really good in relief last week. So that is obviously a downgrade at quarterback there. But the Bears are now the favorites in this game by 2.5 points the last I saw. Bears have won 3 straight. They're off of a bye. And don't forget, later in the season, weeks 9 and 10, back-to-back, they play the Cardinals and Patriots. So you may want to save them for later. Would you trust the Bears in a sneaky, creative spot here against the Commanders, Ryan?
No, don't get cute. I watched the Commanders last week. I've always been a big Mariota fan ever since he played at Oregon. I have been disappointed, obviously, with his career trajectory. I think he's been given a bad hand, but he's also hasn't really performed. I think he's in the perfect offense for him. I think Cliff's offense is just tailor-made. And I mean, you see the success that Jaden Daniels is having. And then I watched I was obviously at the game, and it was like clockwork. I mean, he's got run pass option, just like he did in Oregon. But they're defensively, Washington, that's always been my biggest kind of point of contention for them. Granted, they were playing Carolina. I get it. But their defense, they crushed them up front. They destroyed them. And Carolina's offensive line isn't terrible. They were banged up a little bit, but it's not terrible. And they embarrassed their offensive line, completely dominated both lines. And I think Chicago has shown, especially week 1 when they play Tennessee, when they get beat up front against a more athletic, offense or defensive line, that they struggle. So stay away. This will be a really fun game to watch, though.
All right, next up, Chiefs Raiders. The storylines in this one are interesting because, as Reality Steve mentioned earlier today, the Raiders beat the Chiefs on Christmas last year. Pretty big upset. And then don't forget the training camp drama when the Kermit the Frog doll got brought in with the Patrick Mahomes jersey. And the players were mocking Patrick Mahomes. They were mocking his voice. They were mocking his expressions. And Patrick Mahomes said in a press conference when he was asked about it, "We'll handle it when we handle it." In other words, I'll get my revenge at some point. So this is going to be an interesting game here. Wouldn't be surprised if the Chiefs cover the spread here, because they'll want to lay it on and embarrass the Raiders for that disrespect. But I think the the Raiders defensive line has a nice little mismatch against the Chiefs, because they have good linemen on the interior of their offensive line. Their tackles aren't that good. And if they're healthy, the edge rushers for the Raiders are really good. So that makes me take a step back and say, you know what? The Raiders actually do have some nice matchups in some spots of this game. So maybe I don't like the Chiefs to cover so much. Chiefs, more importantly, are a Christmas team in Circa Survivor. Would you use the Chiefs here, Ryan?
Well, in a word, I don't believe the Raiders have a chance, unfortunately. Especially you reminded me. I remember watching that in training camp, and I'm like, that's the dumbest thing you could do. Like, you're throwing gas on a fire. Like, what?
Poking the bear.
The last loss that the Chiefs have were to the Raiders, and it was because I think they had 2 defensive touchdowns. They had like 100 total yards of offense, but they had Jack Jones picked off had a pick 6 and cocked off as he's going in the end zone, like showing the ball to Mahomes' face. And I don't know. I mean, I will say this: the Raiders actually match up shockingly decent against the Chiefs. Like they just, the way they're built, and they always play the Chiefs tough because for them it's their Super Bowl. However, the Raiders have never beaten the Chiefs in the current stadium. Hasn't happened. We're playing quarterback roulette, never a recipe for success. We have 0 receivers that can beat man-to-man coverage. 0. And I know that Chiefs lost their starting corner last week, which is not being talked about enough. That is a big deal, right? McDuffie is phenomenal. He's much better in the slot, actually, and they're not able to utilize him as much there, but he's phenomenal. When you lose that other corner, like, the problem is
a big downgrade.
Well, I don't know who they're going to throw to. Like, Brock Bowers, yeah, he might go 10 for 89, but death by 1,000 paper cuts. Like, so Raiders can't really run the ball that well, although Madison has provided a little juice. They're starting to play a little better with their 2 offensive linemen, rookies that they're putting in JPJ and I can't remember the other one, but DJ Glaze. But yeah, I think they're going to remember that feeling they had on Christmas Day. They're going to play that clip, and I think Mahomes is going to throw for 400 yards against them, all aimed at Jack Jones for being dumb and saying that.
Yeah, maybe a fun player prop game for maybe a same game parlay with Patrick Mahomes there. We got 3 games left to cover, but first, real quick, want to talk about Survivor Sweat. We talked about it a lot at the beginning of the show when we had Reality Steve on. Here are some of the entries, all of the entries that were on the marketplace. We've got 2% available for $1,250, 99% of an entry available if you got deep pockets for $100,000. 10% left for between $7,000 and $8,000. We got a couple slightly cheaper, some 5% options for you for between $3,000 and $4,000. Mediumly priced between $8,000 and $10,000 for 12%. This is your opportunity to get 12% of $14 million. How about that cheapo right there? Only $800 for 1% there.
Tony, you should probably get that one.
The little $800 one.
Little nibble.
Little nibble. Worth considering. No pick control there, so you're along for someone else's ride. 214 people, man. That's a better shot than winning the lottery. 25% for $22,000. 12% for $10,000. Now, remember, you can go on SurvivorSweat.com and you can see what teams these guys have used. So don't just take the cheapest one or the one with the best value. See who these teams have used and make sure they haven't burned through really good teams. These are actually the cheapest. 2 different 1% for $750. So you got several options, 4 different options under $1,000. If you
Tony,
want to
have you ever heard of a person selling for under 50% and giving up pick control?
Not to my knowledge, but it is something you can do. You can do that and check that box when you list it for sale. That is an option. Something else you can do, Ryan? I'll throw this out there. Reality Steve talked about he sold 50% and gave up control, and someone's probably willing to pay a little bit more if they're going to get control. But you could also sell 5 entries for 10% each and keep control, and compare, hey, I'm going to do this and I'm going to get about the same amount of money and I keep control. So that's something to think about. All right, moving on here. This one I think is going to be very popular in Circa Survivor. Broncos at home against the Panthers, the team that a lot of people, myself included, think is probably the worst team in the NFL right now. It's looking like Andy Dalton is going to be out because he got injured in a car accident, sprained thumb, I think, sprained something on his throwing hand. So it's looking like we're going to get Bryce Young back. You remember our conversation earlier in the year, Ryan, when we talked about how this made it harder to fade the Panthers when Bryce Young left and Andy Dalton came in. So now we're going to reverse that. And I think it makes the Panthers a more desirable option to fade. And don't get me wrong, I do like the Broncos a lot in this spot. But the one thing I do got to say, the Panthers are getting healthier. DJ Wanham, pass rushing linebacker who hasn't played all year, he's practicing. Josie Jewell, who missed the last couple weeks, he's back. Jadeveon Clowney missed the last couple weeks, he's back. Wright Taylor Moulton, he missed the last couple weeks, he's back. Even Adam Thielen is practicing now. I don't know if he's going to be back or not. It might be too early for him with that hamstring, but this Panthers team is getting healthy. So don't just fade them because Bryce Young's there. Realize that they're going to be a little better on defense than they have the last couple weeks. Your thoughts on taking Denver here?
Yeah, Broncos coming off a mini bye looked really good against New Orleans. Panthers coming off of one of the worst performances of the NFL season. I mean, they didn't look good on any aspect of the game. You know, this is one of those that Bryce Young scares me, and I don't know if I'll ever say that again, but I feel like he might finally be in a situation where the pressure's off. They're basically eliminated from the playoffs. Andy Dalton just had a freak injury, so, you know, it's his game. Like, what's the worst that can happen? He plays the whole game and ends up getting traded next week or whatever. Like, he doesn't care. The coach might be playing for his, the owner has been known to, the last 2 years has fired guys mid-season, right? They're 1-6. Like, if they were ever to show some spirit, I believe that this would be the week. Now, they could easily lose by 21 points, get beat like 24-3, and quit on their team. I absolutely could see a scenario with that happening. But the one thing that caused me a little bit to stay away from a Survivor standpoint, I'm just like, I mean, Bryce Young was the number one draft pick for a reason. Like, I don't think he's Jamarcus Russell personally. I actually think he's, you know, on par with Bo Nix, who I think is pretty bad, right? So, you know, I mean, we'll see.
Yeah, I hadn't considered the angle that these are going to be much lower expectations here for Bryce Young. I don't think we're going to see that, mainly because he has had some opportunities in the fourth quarter of games here after Andy Dalton's been pulled, and he's looked bad in those too. Even when the defense is like playing a prevent defense, I'm like, I'm rooting for you, Bryce. I don't want you to do bad. I mean, he's a hard guy to root for, to be honest. So I don't think we're going to see it, but interesting angle there. Something to certainly keep in the back of your mind. Patrick Surtain, full participation in practice today, so it's looking like he's going to be a full go for the Broncos. Sunday Night Football, Cowboys at 49ers.
Stay away. Don't even need to talk about it. No need to have anybody. I know. I'm curious who you think, gun to head, who's going to win this, but I'm staying away.
I can't answer it until I know the injury situation. You got Ayuk is obviously out. He's done for the year. But Debo, Kittle, and Juwan Jennings all missed practice. You're down your top 4 wide receivers. We've talked about how cluster injuries are a killer in Survivor. And so you've got a rookie, Ricky Pearsall, who's playing in his second game of the season in this one that you're going to be relying on. If they get Debo and Kittle, I like the 49ers a lot in this game. If they're going to be down all those guys, it's probably looking more like a coin flip, I think.
Also, Micah Parsons, if he plays, that's a big question too.
And he was limited in practice today, so you're right. There is a good chance that you could see him back. Cowboys also coming off a bye, so they've got extra rest, have had extra time to prepare for this Kyle Shanahan offense. One interesting little note real quick on this one before we move on to our last game. Dr. John York was at practice today for the 49ers. He does not usually show up at these practices. He does this rarely when the 49ers are in spots. It's almost like a bat signal, like, hey, I'm not saying Kyle Shanahan's job is on the line, but I know that Dr. York is not happy because he doesn't show up at practice often. And in the past, the 49ers have responded in these spots. I'm not going to say it's because he went to the practice, but when Kyle Shanahan's back is against the wall, he does really well in those spots. He loses the head-scratching games where he shouldn't lose, and then he wins the ones where his back is against the wall. So I like the 49ers if they're healthy. Last game here, Giants, Steelers. My question for you before you tell me your opinion on this game, would you rather use the Steelers now or in one of two games they have against Cleveland later on in the season?
I mean, again, division versus not division, probably not division, but and the fact that I've been a proponent of Russell Wilson. I've been a contrarian to most people believing that Justin Fields should continue starting. I've been on the Russ wagon the entire time, if you remember, and really happy they made that. I think I wouldn't be surprised if this game, like sometime in the second quarter, if they have a package in with both
Justin
quarterbacks
Fields
on the field, or Fields just taking, one drive and having, a lot of run pass option, kind of like the Saints do with Taysom Hill. But Russell Wilson makes this offense pretty rock solid. And I think they're one receiver away from pushing for a top 3 seed in the AFC. Giants are, starting to implode a little bit. Jones is frustrated he got benched. I don't know why, because I would have been like, yeah, I deserve to get benched. Neighbors is finally back, which is a big deal. They have to be able to run the ball against the Steelers, and if they can't, Jones is just going to get eaten alive.
Yeah, I think you have to consider the Steelers here. I mean, if you like them better in this spot than those Brown spots, Ryan, there's no other spots. It's those 3 options for the Steelers here on out. There's no other spot you're going to feel comfortable taking them. So if you like them here better than the Browns, I feel like you either take them here or you don't use the Steelers. The Steelers are not one of your 20 teams that you use this year. So keep that in mind. At some point, you got to use 20 teams if you want to use Circa Survivor. Are the Steelers one of those teams that you want to leave out? I think we've done all we can, Ryan. Great show. Thanks so much for getting Reality Steve on. That was awesome. I love talking to him as well. We're going to be back here on Saturday, 9:30 Eastern time after the Circa Survivor selections come out. You got any last words, Ryan, or a bold prediction for week 8 for us?
Ooh, bold prediction. Let's go with Rams over Minnesota tomorrow night.
Ooh, I like that. My bold prediction, I'm not going to say that the Browns are going to beat the Ravens, but I think the Browns are going to give the Ravens a sweat, and that game could be a lot closer than people think on Sunday. So have fun, everybody. Take care. What's that?
I do not believe that. So.
All right. Take care, guys.